Mom carved the Thanksgiving turkey with a smile and suddenly said, "Thanks to your miscarriage, our family line stays pure." Some relatives laughed, while my sister gently patted her son's head and added, "One real grandchild is enough, don't you think?" The room filled with quiet chuckles as if it were all a joke. I slowly placed my fork on the table and stood up without saying a word. What none of them realized was that this would be the last family gathering they'd ever have like this. The steam from my coffee rose in thin, ghostly swirls as I stared out at the frost-hardened garden of our Eden Prairie home. Outside, the transition from autumn to winter was violent and sudden, leaving the upscale neighborhood of Minnesota trapped under a brittle, sparkling layer of ice. Those lingering gold and crimson leaves were now frozen in place, glittering like diamonds in the morning sun, mocking the warmth I was supposed to feel. Another Thanksgiving had arrived, and while my life looked flawless from the outside, a deep, unsettling chill had settled in my bones that no heater could reach. My career as a senior accountant was thriving, my marriage to David was the picture of stability, and yet, the silent fracture between my mother and me felt like it was finally ready to break. "Amy, are you ready to face the music?" David asked softly, his voice pulling me from the window. I turned to see my husband standing there in his perfectly tailored suit, his travel suitcase gripped firmly in his hand. He was a rising executive at a major IT firm, a man who possessed a rare combination of ambition and a gentle, empathetic soul. He was the ideal husband, always supportive of my long hours at the accounting firm and patient with the complexities of my family. I forced a smile onto my face, trying to mask the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "Yes, I am fine," I told him, though the lie felt heavy. "Do not worry about me, just focus on your meeting." David was missing Thanksgiving this year for a career-defining project, a business trip that held the future of his company in the balance. I knew he felt the weight of leaving me alone to navigate the shark-infested waters of my mother's dining room. "Did you tell your mother I wouldn't be there?" he asked, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. I let out a dry, mirthless laugh, mimicking her sharp, judgmental tone. "Oh," I told her. "She said she simply couldn't believe you were putting commerce before the sanctity of Thanksgiving." My mother, Martha, was a woman who didn't just attend the First Presbyterian Church, she ruled it. As a central figure in the community, she managed charities and social galas with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. To Martha, Thanksgiving wasn't about gratitude or reflection, it was a high-stakes performance designed to showcase her perfect lineage to the town. She obsessed over the concept of a pure bloodline, a phrase she used to brag about our family's multi-generational roots in this land. But lately, that phrase had begun to sound more like a weapon than a point of pride. The shift had happened 2 years ago, following my miscarriage. Outwardly, Mother remained the doting matriarch, but I had seen the flashes of relief in her eyes when she looked at me, as if a defective branch had been pruned from the family tree. In contrast, her obsession with my sister Linda's 5-year-old son, Tommy, had grown into something borderline fanatical. Linda was the golden child now, a devoted housewife who lived for Mother's approval and mirrored her every opinion. Even John, Linda's husband and a successful real estate owner, had started to look worried about how much influence Mother had over their household and their son. David placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, sensing my spiraling thoughts. "Are you really going to be okay?" he whispered. I looked into his eyes and nodded, trying to find my own strength. "I will handle it my way, I promised." He gave me a silent, knowing nod before heading to the door. As the cold wind rushed in through the entryway, I watched him leave, knowing that tomorrow I would be walking into a house filled with secrets. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived with a biting, crystalline cold. As I drove toward the massive white estate that had been in our family for generations, I turned the car's heater to its maximum setting, yet I still felt a shiver. The sky was a bruising shade of gray, and stray snowflakes danced across the windshield like tiny warnings. Mother's house was a landmark in Eden Prairie, a symbol of old-world prestige that demanded respect from everyone who passed it. Several luxury cars were already parked in the circular driveway, signaling that the performance was about to begin. When I stepped through the front door, the scent of roasting turkey and expensive perfume hit me instantly. Mother was already in character, wearing a navy blue dress and a strand of perfectly matched pearls. Every hair on her head was meticulously placed, and her makeup was a mask of flawless composure. "Is David really not coming?" she asked immediately, her voice laced with a sharp, practiced disappointment. I took a breath, keeping my voice level. "No, Mother." As I explained, his project reached a critical phase. She huffed, a small sound of pure judgment. "I suppose I should expect nothing less. You young people have no sense of priority. Work always comes before the family unit." I decided to ignore the jab and headed straight for the kitchen, seeking refuge in the bustle of meal preparation. Aunt Carol and my cousin Jennifer were already there, moving through the motions of basting the turkey and mashing potatoes. "Amy, we are so glad you're here," Carol said, but her eyes gave her away. There was a look of pity there, the same look I had received from every relative since the loss of my pregnancy. To them, I was a tragic figure, a woman who had failed to contribute to the pure bloodline Mother held so dear. The atmosphere in the house felt brittle, like the ice on the trees outside. While the surface was polished and bright, I could feel the foundation beginning to crumble. My intuition as an accountant, a profession built on finding the discrepancies in the numbers, told me that the books were being cooked. There was a truth hidden in this house, buried under the elegant table settings and the forced laughter. I could see it in the way Linda had been acting lately. She had become strangely close to Adam Foster, the charismatic young assistant pastor who had joined the church 6 months ago. While the other women in the congregation swooned over his sermons, the connection between him and my sister felt different, deeper, and far more dangerous. I stood in the kitchen, watching the steam rise from the pots, and felt a profound sense of looming destiny. The truth was coming, an unavoidable force that was about to change the entire fabric of our family. I didn't know exactly what would trigger the collapse, but I knew that by the time the sun set on this Thanksgiving, the large white house on the hill would never be the same again. The doorbell rang again, signaling the arrival of the rest of the guests, and I steeled myself. It was time to take my seat at the table and wait for the cracks to show. The heavy silence in the dining room was broken by the sharp click of the front door as Linda's family arrived. My mother, Martha, didn't just greet them. She surged forward with an almost desperate hunger, her arms outstretched to claim her grandson. 5-year-old Tommy let out a bright, innocent laugh as he was swept up into his grandmother's embrace, the undisputed prince of her carefully curated world. Behind them, Linda stood with a look of smug contentment, the golden daughter who had fulfilled the legacy. Her husband, John, was a different story. The confidence he usually wore as a successful real estate executive seemed frayed at the edges. He caught my eye for a fleeting second, his gaze heavy with an unspoken, troubled weight, before he quickly looked away. As we settled into the living room, the air became thick with the suffocating performance of a perfect family. The conversation was a bland tapestry of church bake sales, neighborhood gossip, and Tommy's achievements at school. To anyone else, it was the sound of a holiday. To me, it sounded hauntingly hollow. I watched Linda closely, noticing how she expertly navigated the conversation to avoid even the slightest mention of Adam Foster, the new assistant pastor. It was a calculated omission that felt louder than if she had spoken his name. "Dinner is served." Mother's voice rang out, vibrating with the authority of a woman who viewed her dining table as a throne room. We moved into the dining room, where the atmosphere was one of stifling elegance. The table was draped in fine linens, set with expensive Lenox china that caught the flicker of silver candlesticks. At the center lay the turkey, a glistening, golden-brown centerpiece that looked like a trophy. We took our seats, hands folded and heads bowed, as Mother began the grace. Her voice was steady, filled with the practiced dignity of a woman who believed God was her personal acquaintance. As she thanked him for the blessings bestowed upon our house, I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the Minnesota winter. The ritual of carving began with a heavy silver knife, an heirloom passed down through generations of our supposed pure bloodline. Mother handled it with clinical precision. The interrogation started almost immediately. "Amy, you're always so buried in your ledgers," Aunt Carol said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern that felt like a trap. "Don't you think it's time you found a real purpose in life?" Jennifer, never one to miss a chance to twist the knife, chimed in with a nod. "God gives us trials for a reason, Amy. Perhaps there was a divine meaning behind your loss." The air left my lungs. They were talking about my miscarriage as if it were a clerical error. I kept my eyes fixed on my plate, my knuckles white as I gripped my napkin. Then Mother spoke. She didn't even look up from the turkey, her voice disturbingly cheerful as she sliced through the meat. "Well, in a way, your miscarriage saved our bloodline from being tainted," she said. The words hit the table like a shard of ice. For a heartbeat, there was total silence, and then the unthinkable happened. The relatives laughed. It was a cruel, frivolous sound that made my skin crawl. Linda reached over, gently stroking Tommy's hair with a triumphant smile. "After all," she added, "a real grandchild is all we really need." Time didn't just slow down, it stopped. The world narrowed to the sight of my sister's hand on that little boy's head. Very slowly, I put my fork down. The metal clinked against the china, a tiny sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a deliberate lack of haste. Every head turned. "Amy?" Mother asked, a slight, uncertain tremor finally entering her voice. "Please excuse me for a moment," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly firm. I walked out of the room without looking back, leaving the confused murmurs of my family behind. I stood by the large living room window, watching the light dusting of frost turn into a heavy, silent snowfall. The sight of the white flakes dancing in the dark was the only thing that kept my heart from racing out of my chest. A shadow moved in the hallway. I turned to find John standing there. The polished, successful man I knew was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he was drowning. "Amy, I need to talk to you," he whispered, his voice stripped of its usual authority. It was a cocktail of raw anxiety and desperate determination. "Something is wrong with Linda." I didn't say a word, I just waited. John looked over his shoulder toward the dining room before leaning in closer. "She's been seeing the assistant pastor. Frequently." He took a ragged breath, a deep sigh that seemed to age him 10 years. "I'm going to get a DNA test for Tommy. I need to know. Will you help me?" In that moment, the vague suspicions that had been haunting me solidified into a cold, hard certainty. My mind, trained to find the hidden truth in complex sets of data, began to catalog the evidence. "I understand," I told him quietly. The truth that was beginning to surface this Thanksgiving would shatter the image Mother had spent a lifetime building, but I knew it was an unavoidable destiny. 3 days later, I sat in the oppressive silence of my home office. David was still away, and the only sound was the rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. I had already ordered a DNA kit for John, who had purchased a commercial version from Amazon. It was incredible how modern technology had democratized secrets that used to require a private investigator. But I had my own methods. As the auditor for the First Presbyterian Church, I had access to the one thing that never lied: the numbers. I began my forensic audit of the church's charitable funds, specifically looking at the period since Adam Foster's arrival. It didn't take long. There were regular, fixed transfers to a specific, unassuming account. The amounts weren't large enough to trigger an automatic red flag, but their consistency was a screaming siren to a professional like me. "Amy, what are you doing?" I jumped, quickly closing the browser tab. Mother was standing in the doorway of my study, her eyes narrowed with a lingering suspicion. "I'm just preparing for the church audit, Mother," I said, my heart hammering. She seemed to accept the answer, but the coldness remained. "Your behavior at dinner was a disgrace to this family," she snapped. "Think of our reputation, especially now that Linda is being promoted to youth department head. Adam personally recommended her." I frowned. The youth department was a position of immense influence. "Why Linda?" Once Mother left, I dove back in, tracking Linda's digital footprint. Every Wednesday afternoon, Linda claimed to be at church meetings, but the official calendar was blank. Then I found the Grayson, a modest business hotel in the suburbs. Her credit card records showed a pattern of stays there over the last 6 months, often coinciding with those missing Wednesday afternoons. I picked up the phone and called John. "I found something," I told him. "It's not just the hotel." When Tommy was born, Adam was an intern at the church. They knew each other back then. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear John's labored breathing. "We might not even need the DNA results," I added. Over the next week, the evidence piled up like a mountain of debt. Hotel reservations, restaurant receipts, and the most damning of all, the anonymous transfers disguised as church charity. Adam was using the congregation's donations to fund his life with my sister. But my investigation unmasked a second thief. Martha Anderson, the paragon of virtue, had been skimming small amounts from the church for years. It wasn't enough to bankrupt the place, but it was enough to destroy her. I sighed, holding the power to ruin my mother in my hands, unsure if I was ready to pull the trigger. The decision was made for me when Linda burst into my house one afternoon, her face a mask of rage and terror. "Amy, you're investigating me, aren't you?" she screamed. "Adam told me someone was digging into the church accounts." I stared at my sister, watching the panic dance in her eyes. "Please, Amy," she begged, her voice suddenly cracking. "If this gets out, Mother, the church, everything will be gone." I looked at her, my expression hard. "Tell me the truth, Linda," I said. "Tell me everything." Linda began to unravel, her voice shaking as she finally admitted the truth that had been rotting our family from the inside out. It started 5 years ago when Adam was just a seminary student, a secret romance that grew into a reckless obsession and eventually led to Tommy's birth. I felt a cold surge of nausea. "Does Mother know?" I whispered. Linda covered her face with both hands, her shoulders heaving. "Yes," she sobbed. "Mother knew everything. She covered it all up to save the family's reputation." Just as the weight of that betrayal settled over me, my phone vibrated with a jarring, mechanical ring. It was the hospital. My mother had been rushed to the emergency room with a suspected stroke. The drive to the hospital was a blur of gray slush and panicked silence. When we arrived at Fairview Southdale, the waiting room was already occupied by a huddle of grim-faced church officials, with Adam Foster standing among them like a wolf in sheep's clothing. The doctor informed us that Mother had collapsed at the church after receiving an anonymous letter of accusation. It was a detailed roadmap of her financial crimes and the illicit affair between her golden daughter and the assistant pastor. "Who would do this?" Linda asked in a trembling voice. I looked out the window at the deepening snow, watching the flakes fall like a white shroud over the ruins of our lives. The regular, rhythmic beep of the machines in the intensive care unit was the only heartbeat the family had left. Mother was stable, but the right side of her body was paralyzed, her iron grip on the community finally broken. In the quiet of the waiting room, John stood up, his face gaunt. "The DNA results came back," he said, his voice cracking. David, who had rushed back from his trip to be by my side, reached for my hand. John looked at Linda, his eyes filled with a hollow, devastating grief. "Tommy isn't mine," he choked out. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. "Linda," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Tell them everything. Tell them about Mother, and tell them about Adam." My sister finally lowered her hands, her eyes raw and bloodshot. The confession came out in jagged fragments, the secret meetings, the panic when she realized she was pregnant, and Mother's calculated decision to rush the marriage to John to provide a cover. Mother even used church funds to pay Adam hush money, Linda admitted, nodding slowly as her story finally aligned with the discrepancies I had found in the ledgers. Everything had been a strategy to protect the pure bloodline that was nothing more than a lie. When I was finally allowed to visit Mother's room, she looked small and fragile, stripped of the authority she had worn like armor. She gestured weakly toward her handbag. "Burn them," she rasped, her voice thick from the stroke. Inside were the church bank books and the notebooks documenting her payments to Adam. "I can't do that, Mother," I answered firmly, holding the evidence of her sins. "It is time to let the secrets die." That evening, the world we knew ended. The board of elders convened, and the truth was laid bare. Adam was dismissed in disgrace, Mother was stripped of her titles, and Linda was effectively banished from the community she had sought to rule. The local papers were merciless, with headlines about the fall of the prestigious Anderson family slicing through the town. A week later, as we discussed Mother's long-term care, I made the decision she dreaded most. She would be moving into a nursing home. Linda accused me of abandoning her, but I looked her in the eye. "This is about reality," I said. "Mother needs professional care, and we all need to breathe." On the day of her discharge, Mother held my hand with her good one. "You might have been right," she whispered, the first honest thing she had ever said to me. I was so worried about appearances that I lost sight of what was real. I squeezed her thin fingers, watching the tears glisten in her eyes. "A reputation built on lies will always crumble, Mother," I told her. A year has passed since the storm broke. David and I have built a new life in western Minnesota, 2 hours away from the ghosts of Eden Prairie. In our new kitchen, I prepared a turkey for a quiet Thanksgiving for two. The air wasn't bitter this year, it was peaceful. On the table, nestled near the plates, were the finalized papers from the adoption agency. We were starting a family on our own terms, one built on a genuine bond rather than a manufactured bloodline. I visited Mother recently at her luxury care facility. Her paralysis is improving, and she seems to be facing herself for the first time in her life. Linda's fall was harder, the divorce is final, and John has full custody of Tommy. When she came to my door last week, emaciated and begging for money because Adam had fled to another state without paying a cent of support, I had to be strong. "I won't clean up your messes anymore," I told her, watching her walk away until she was just a shadow in the snow. John, however, has found a new strength. He is raising Tommy with a fierce, unconditional love that proves fatherhood is about more than biology. "Thank you for the truth, Amy," he told me during a recent visit. "It saved us both." The turkey in the oven began to fill the house with a savory, rich aroma, a scent of hope rather than regret. David wrapped his arms around me, looking at the adoption papers. "Next year, we might be a family of 3, he said. I leaned back into him, watching the snow fall softly outside. We had paid a cruel price for the truth, but in the ruins of the old life, we had finally found something real. The golden color of the turkey wasn't a mask this time. It was a promise of a future where we no longer had to hide.